No props take. Right, we now come to the statements. Secretary of State for Business, Jonathan Reynolds.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to update the House on the improved deal this Labour government has secured for the workers of Tata Steel, specifically as it relates to their plant in Port Talbot. But as well as setting out the details of this improved deal, I am also announcing today our ambition for a new UK-wide steel strategy, one which equips our steelmaking industry with the right support, not just to adapt, but to thrive in the new green economy. But before I do so, I want to address the situation we have inherited. Since becoming the Secretary of State 2 months ago, I've had to respond to a series of challenges, not just with the steel industry, but also in shipping, such as Harland and Wolff, and in other areas where the previous government had simply ceased to make decisions and decided to leave them for us to deal with. This was a dereliction of duty, and it has left the steel industry in particular in an extremely perilous position. The last government had been promising a plan for the steel industry for years. With what I'm able to announce today, with the signing of a legally binding deal that enables Tata to order their electric arc furnace as part of a significantly improved package, this government has made more progress in 2 months than they made over the last Parliament. But even if we had started these negotiations a year ago, never mind many years ago, as they had the opportunity to do, I have no doubt we would have secured an even better deal for the community. So I would like to start with an apology to the people of Port Talbot, because they were let down by the previous government. And whilst this deal is much improved, I acknowledge very much it falls short of what would be my ideal. However, I have been to Port Talbot several times. I've met the workforce there, the reps, the generations of families who have literally forged Port Talbot as we know it. And that's why, when Tata first announced they would be closing the blast furnaces with some 2,800 job losses with them, I knew the workforce deserved so much better. I warned my predecessor not to proceed with what they had negotiated. Why? Because I was confident the government could secure a better deal for Tata's workers and a better deal for the people of Port Talbot. And Mr. Speaker, I'm able to announce today that this government has secured that better deal. But I reiterate, had we had the opportunity that the previous government had over so many years, we could have done more. The key features are as follows. I can announce today that we've agreed a process with Tata to assess investment opportunities for new, additional capabilities that will deliver more secure, long-term jobs than the deal that we inherited. This is on top of the plans for the instalment of the electric arc furnace. We have agreed a process with Tata to take this forward, and I'll be able to report back to the House on this progress. But for me, this is the most important element. And I should therefore explain, Mr. Speaker, that the reason I'm announcing this deal now, rather than after this process is complete, is because in order for Tata to secure the build slot for the electric arc furnace, that element needs to be sorted now. Further delays would put the whole project at risk and could lead to a much, much worse outcome. Secondly, in every conversation I've had with Tata's directors, I've stressed the need to avoid compulsory redundancies wherever possible. I've asked them to channel their efforts instead into job matching and retraining so that the steelworkers of Port Talbot, who've dedicated so much to the industry in the past, can now help shape its future as they'll be able to transition and move within the business. But as well as that, Tata are agreeing to offer a comprehensive training programme for any employee as an alternative to those at risk of compulsory redundancy. This would be on full pay for 1 month and then £27,000 a year per employee for 11 months, and Tata will fund all of these costs. Employees will be able to choose from recognised qualifications to develop sought-after skills which will be in high demand in the local economy now and long into the future. We know too that Tata expects that during the construction of the electric arc furnace, at least 500 new jobs could be created, which will tap into the local labour market wherever possible. Thirdly, where we cannot secure new jobs or training, working closely with the unions, I can tell the House that we've helped to secure improved terms on redundancies. Tata's employees are now able to express an interest in the most generous voluntary redundancy package the company has ever offered for a restructuring of this size. Employees will now be paid 2.8 weeks of earnings for each year of service, up to a maximum of 25 years. At the same time, we're ensuring there's a minimum redundancy payment, £15,000 pro rata, and a retention payment of £5,000 for employees leaving the business because of these closures. And over 2,000 members of staff have expressed an interest in voluntary redundancy who will be eligible for these terms. Fourthly, as part of the deal, the company will also be releasing 385 acres of their site for sale or transfer. This is valuable real estate which will help bring in more companies and more employers, not just from the steel sector, but from a whole host of other industries too, helping to diversify the workforce at Port Talbot. While those on the opposition benches told us there was no alternative to what was originally proposed, we knew that there was, and we have bargained hard for it. And we're putting in watertight conditions within our grant funding agreement for job guarantees to claw back investment if these jobs do not materialise. For example, there is now an improved grant repayment of £40,000 for every job that is not retained post-transformation. This money will be repaid directly to the government and is a powerful incentive for Tata to deliver and meet the 5,000 UK jobs target. But, Mr. Speaker, our ambition for steel is so much bigger and broader than one single company. It is about the whole sector. The UK has always been a proud steelmaking nation with a rich heritage stretching back to the Industrial Revolution, from cars to cranes to ships and scaffolding. British steel has been and is still used the world over, embodying our industrial might and innovation. And yet for years, steel has been a neglected industry in this country. Crude steel production has declined by more than 50% in the last 10 years. Indeed, some proclaimed the industry's decline would be inevitable in the 21st century, that it was somehow a sunset industry. But, Mr. Speaker, those people are wrong. On this side of the House, we have never believed that decline is inevitable. And while the industry faces challenges today, we want to do everything we can to ensure that it can adapt and grow tomorrow. And that's why I'm pleased to announce that we will introduce our new steel strategy. As honourable members know, our manifesto included plans to make available £2.5 billion for steel, on top of the £500 million transformation of Port Talbot. And our intention is to increase our UK capabilities, something the previous government never attempted, so that we can create a more vibrant, competitive steel sector in the UK. As part of our steel strategy, this government will look seriously at options to improve steel capabilities across the supply chain, including in primary steelmaking. And we are also clear that we won't be able to prioritise short-term subsidies over long-term jobs. But that is why, with the help of independent experts, we will also be reviewing the viability of technologies for the production of primary steel, including possibly direct reduced iron. Steel is essential to delivering on our net zero goals and building the next generation of green infrastructure, which is something I know members of this government are passionate about. And that is why, as part of our steel strategy, we intend to use the new Procurement Act to drive economic growth and account for social value in the things the government buys and the projects we commission. This work is already underway to increase the role of steel as we build our manufacturing base. We also recognise that for far too long, British energy-intensive industries, including the steel sector, have been held back by high electricity costs. More often than not, this has made the UK less attractive to international investors, but we are going to take action. Our clean energy mission will ensure we are no longer exposed to the kind of gas price shocks we've seen in recent years, helping British businesses to compete and win in the global market. To support that ambition, we're also working with other like-minded nations to tackle global trade distortions, including through our chairing of the Global Forum on Steel Excess Capacity this year. Our steel strategy will be developed and delivered in partnership with the steel sector and the trade unions, and it will work in lockstep with the government's industrial strategy. Our ambition to ramp up investment, strengthen our supply chains, and create more well-paid jobs in the places where they're needed the most. To drive our partnership on the steel strategy forward, I will shortly meet with industry experts and interested parties to discuss the future of the industry, and we intend to publish the steel strategy in spring of next year. But, Mr Speaker, this is a government that cares about steel and cares about the communities it supports and recognises its fundamental importance to the economy. And supporting steel in this country is involved in being involved in the detail, shepherding individual plants into the future while protecting the people within them. But it's also about providing a direction of travel, an inspiration for investment and a cause for confidence so that the sector can play its part in the next 10 years and beyond. We're not naive, Mr Speaker, about the scale of the challenge before us. But while this is still challenging, I believe that this is both a better deal than that was on the table for Port Talbot and the maximum improvement that we could make in 2 months. It represents both a better destination and a better transition to the bright future that steel will have under this government. And I commend this statement to the House.
Prime Minister Gregson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement? I wish I could say I was surprised by any of the contents, but it has, of course, been relentlessly briefed to the media and press over the last couple of days. It's also no surprise that once again Labour are presiding over the demise of our steel sector. Under the last Labour government, output fell 47%, 56% of jobs were lost, and today's deal now means 100% of output gone at Port Talbot, with an electric arc furnace taking, at best, Mr Speaker, 5 years to get up and running, with some suggesting 8 to 9 years before a single new job is created, if we see any new jobs at all. This is, as the statement says, a transition, but it is a heartbreaking transition for thousands of people, a transition from people in work to people out of work. Why didn't, Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State take steps in his discussions with Tata to ensure that the blast furnace was not closed before the new arc furnace can open? Is this really the new Labour playbook? Scrap jobs, scrap production, and become reliant on higher polluting countries for imports. That, Mr Speaker, is not what I call decarbonisation. I must say, I do feel a little sorry for the Secretary of State, who has been dispatched here today to announce these spending decisions just a day after Labour's day of shame on winter fuel cuts for pensioners. In government, Conservatives provided a grant of £500 million towards the £1.25 billion invested by Tata Steel. At the time, this was one of the largest support packages in government history. At the time of the last government's announcement, this support was expected to save at least 5,000 jobs in the company. We worked with the Welsh Government and Tata Steel to establish a dedicated transition board to support affected employees and the local economy, backed by £100 million in total. So can the Secretary of State update on any of those job projections when he returns to the dispatch box? But further, Mr Speaker, today's announcement is notable by the absence of any reassurance or plans for the thousands of steelworkers in Scunthorpe who may not have jobs by Christmas. Equally as notable in today's announcement is once again a failure from the government to commit any detail on the domestic production of virgin steel. He says we'll have a steel strategy in the spring when thousands of jobs and production capacity has been scrapped today. It was no surprise that last week, during the urgent question on steel, the Industry Minister failed to commit 4 times to safeguarding the future of virgin steel production in this country. I'm sure the Secretary of State doesn't need reminding that if he allows Scunthorpe to close too, we'll be the only G7 country without the ability to produce virgin steel, leaving us open and vulnerable to cheap foreign imports, particularly from China. To his credit, he has always argued against offshoring our steel industry. He conceded once that this would be a fundamental political mistake. So can I ask him what conversations he has had with the Secretaries of State for Transport and for Defence about the impact of this government's new steel policy on our national security and ability to deliver infrastructure? Can he assure the House that he's doing everything in his power to make sure we do not lose virgin steel manufacturing here in the United Kingdom? For the benefit of new colleagues, the government Then, when in opposition, we're committed to a £28 billion a year of borrowing to fund their decarbonisation plans. A price tag which has magically disappeared, but a target which has not. Of this, the Secretary of State made promises to the steel industry. Where are they now? Where is that money? Is he still battling the Chancellor? We know Labour's unions are quite successful in squeezing money from the Treasury, so maybe he can send them to stand up for the Chancellor if he's having problems. But, Mr. Speaker, this government has our support to ensure the future of steelmaking in this country is sustainable. That speaks beyond Tata and beyond South Wales. Only in Labour's world can the word improved mean fewer jobs and higher polluting imports. Absolutely. So I hope the Secretary of State can return to the dispatch box and do better for UK steelmaking.
Secretary of State.
Well now, Mr. Speaker, I've been a Member of Parliament for 14 years, and I think I've seen some interesting political events in those 14 years. I don't think I've ever heard such a brass neck on a contribution from the Conservative Party, and there's quite a menu to choose from. Let me just explain what I was doing on polling week leading up to the 4th of July. At this point, I was sat over there, still if Parliament had been sitting. I was the Shadow Secretary of State. And I was going from key seat to key seat, as you would expect us to do, and I was negotiating with unions and with Tata and with every relevant body, my colleagues in the Welsh Government, to prevent action that would have resulted in the closure entirely of Port Talbot on polling day. It was like the government had already gone. They were not on the pitch. So the first thing I had to do before I even became the Secretary of State was make sure there was something there to save, because it would have gone had it been the party opposite. Let me also just... you really need to listen to this, because part of those contributions were factually inaccurate, and I will help you by telling you what the situation actually is. This will save more jobs. That's the point of the new investment. And for those people who are unable to get those new jobs, there will be better terms for them. There will be a better cushioning of their retraining into the rest of the economy. I've explained why it is a better deal. And I hope the Honourable Member has seen this. He did mention some of the media. I'd just like to say that hasn't come from my department, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate there are lots of interested parties in this. But the unions have recognised it as a better deal. Our Welsh Labour Government has recognised it as a better deal. And I hope, taking a step back from that statement, the Conservative Party recognises why this will make such a difference. Now, when I talked about my frustration, Mr. Speaker, because the Honourable Member mentioned virgin steelmaking, he will understand that the two blast furnace sites, Scunthorpe and Port Talbot, lose a great deal of money every day. And they're so fed up with the lack of action under the last government that they have put timescales on the closure of that. So the simple truth is that I do not have the time frame that was available to the Conservative Party. And even more when it comes to somewhere like Scunthorpe, I do not have in place things like the carbon capture infrastructure yet that would be necessary for the kind of solution I would ideally want. The kind of hybrid the Honourable Member is putting forward, keeping the blast furnaces open whilst you bring online the electric arc furnaces. I would love to be in a position to look at that, but all the time that we could have done and could have worked on that was under the Conservative government, and you didn't do it. And therefore the options available to us are far less, and the situation is far more challenging. Now, specifically in relation to Scunthorpe, yes, I've had many meetings since I became the Secretary of State with the UK management, but also with Mr. Lee, the principal shareholder. I've had 3, I believe, as Secretary of State, and I met him as the Shadow Secretary of State. We have been clear that we want there to be a transition in Scunthorpe, that we want to put up government money alongside what that company may do, but it's got to be a transition. It's got to be a transition to the future, and the workforce and the route that is offered to them has to be part of that. But my frustration is that the options available to me, even if successful, Mr. Speaker, in doing that, are still very, very difficult for that area. The kind of solution I would ideally want to deliver, that could have been delivered by the party opposite in those long 14 years, is not available. And I think, leaving this chamber today, I hope the Conservative Party can reflect both on the mistakes they have made, their lack of action, the legacy that they bequeathed us, but fundamentally the improvements we've been able to make in such a short period of time.
Chair of the Select Committee, Liam Byrne.
Speaker, not yet Chair of a Select Committee, but fingers crossed. I welcome the Secretary of State's announcement today, and I hope the whole House will recognise that what has brought us today is not a set of sound bites, but a strategy that would actually benefit from a stronger cross-party consensus for the long term. And so I do hope that this could be the subject of a future Select Committee inquiry. But the Secretary of State rightly puts his finger on the key issue, which is that to safeguard the future of the steel industry, we need to de-risk the demand for steel in this country. So what reassurances can he give the House today about how we will use procurement and, crucially, the creation of a bigger offshore wind industry in this country to drive that demand that will keep the furnaces going at Port Talbot and elsewhere? This was the country that pioneered steel making. We need to reinvent now its future.
Can I just say to members, especially senior members, when you look that way, I can't hear what you say. Please, go through the chair. That's where we keep the neutrality working as well. Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that. He is absolutely right. What we are seeking to do here is not just deliver new, improved transition deals for the key sites, but improve the overall business and investor environment for steel in the UK. I do believe that can be done. When it comes to the kind of future investments that we are thinking about, I do believe there are core capacities that could be very successful in the United Kingdom. Obviously, in 2 months, that is not sufficient for the due diligence that is required around some of the elaborate and quite considered business cases that are necessary to do that. But the process going forward is about delivering that, and I think we can turn this into an extremely positive story for UK steel.
We now come to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Steelmaking is of vital strategic importance to the UK. We need it to build the crucial infrastructure needed to generate sustainable growth and to safeguard our national security. And the neglect of the steel industry in recent years is just another part of the previous government's disastrous legacy. Today's announcement is a welcome sign of change. The steps the government have outlined to help protect jobs and, crucially, to develop a steel strategy are long overdue. We need to finally move on from a patchwork of last-minute rescues to a long-term plan that will set the industry on a sustainable footing. And this is as true of the steel industry as it is across our economy. We desperately need a real industrial strategy to work in tandem with this plan for steel. So will the Secretary of State assure us that his steel strategy will be fully aligned with a wider industrial strategy and will take a view of steel's importance to our economy and society as a whole? And will it aim to balance the need for infrastructure, national security and net zero commitments? And will he assure us that he will bring the strategy to this House by spring next year for scrutiny and debate so that the industry can finally move on with certainty?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the honourable member's words and the recognition of the improvement that we have made with this deal, but fundamentally about the need for that better business environment and moving away from relatively short-term responses to that much better, more secure, long-term framework around that. She will understand the significant increase in investment this new government is willing to make can make a substantial difference. However, the emphasis on that has got to be on long-term investments for the future, for long-term secure jobs. There's several different ways we can do that. I absolutely agree it should be aligned with the industrial strategy. We'll be able to make some announcements on that in the near future, leading up to the launch of the steel strategy next year.
The other potential chair of the Select Committee, Matt Weston.
Mr. Speaker, that's incredibly gracious of you. I hope those words were heard across the chamber. Can I welcome the Secretary of State to his place, but also really underline the importance of his commitment and the strength of his negotiation. I really welcome that. As has been heard, the point about public procurement, I think, is really important. So I would add my voice to that. But can I also just draw his attention to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which, as I understand it, we have a disadvantage in terms of how this has been established for the UK. It's due to be introduced on the 1st of January 2027, later than in the EU, which is clearly a disadvantage to UK producers. Can you update the House on what he plans to do?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that and for your very skillful introduction, Mr Speaker, to him. He is right to talk about that wider business environment. He specifically asks about the carbon border adjustment mechanism. What we've inherited is the UK being out of line with the European Union, obviously because our carbon price is lower. There's a potential carbon barrier to UK exports into the single market as a result of that. I can tell him we are looking at that, and I do believe that carbon border adjustment mechanisms are a key part of a wider policy environment that must deliver decarbonisation, that is not deindustrialisation, and we have to recognise the current policy environment is not doing that in the way any of us would want to see.
Dame Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened to the statement from the Secretary of State with interest. Can he specifically say when the strategy will be published and brought to this House? Secondly, what level of government investment will be behind the strategy? And thirdly, what assurances is he able to give to steel workers across England, Port Talbot and Scunthorpe in particular, that their jobs are not going to be put at risk because of steel being dumped in the UK from China?
I'm grateful to her for her questions. The strategy will be in spring next year. The resources behind it, including the existing government allocation for Port Talbot and the new money the government will bring. It's a £3 billion clean steel fund, so it's a significant investment. Obviously, I want a certain amount of return for that. I want to work with private sector partners. A lot of the question here, the kind of capex that's involved in the transition to green steel requires very significant partners that can deliver. It's not just a question of can the government do this alone, and I think honourable members do recognise that. The issue of steel safeguards is very, very important. As you will know, steel is a significant part of the existing protections that are in place from the Trade Remedies Authority. Many of those do relate, though not exclusively, to China, but that is an important part of that, and we keep that under very regular review.
Catherine Fuchs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank my right honourable friend for today's announcement and reminding us of the role that steel plays in our green transition. He's done more in 2 months than the party opposite has done in 14 years. Many of my constituents in Monmouthshire work in the steel supply chain and in steel, especially in Caldicot and Chepstow. So can my right honourable friend recognise that your announcement today has ramifications for the whole of South Wales?
So stay.
Well, I thank her very much for her question, Mr Speaker. I do believe, I'll say again, I wish we were in a position to do even more, but I can tell honourable members across the House, I believe this is the maximum improvement that was possible within 2 months. And I know in constituencies like hers, what people are seeking more than anything else is a recognition that steel is not some sort of sunset industry. It is vital to the future. It is not the case that it should be in inevitable decline in the UK. We are an outlier indeed in terms of the size of our steel industry compared to comparable G7 and OECD countries. So this could be and should be a very positive story, and I am honestly confident we can deliver that in future.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman mentions quite clearly procurement, and one of the issues that's taken place over countless years is statements and new strategies on how we deal with steelmaking. Can he set out his plans to ensure that there's a long-term order book for steelmaking in this country so that the investors can make sure that they're getting value for money as well as the taxpayer, and equally how he will endeavour to use the public purse to purchase British steel, at the same time encouraging British steel to be exported in other parts of the world?
I'm grateful to him for his question. Yes, I very much agree. As an opposition Shadow Secretary of State, I used to avidly read the statistics the department already publishes about UK content in domestic steel procurement. I think one of the issues we've got to recognise is that is actually usually relatively high, but only in the sectors where we are producing the particular grades of steel. I think part of the strategy has to look at future demand, not just in terms of what we already produce, but where are there gaps, where are there business opportunities. If we're improving the business environment, not just in terms of helping incumbent producers within the United Kingdom transition, but bringing in new entrants, more competition in the market. I do, whenever I look at this, see very clearly there is significant demand in the market. It is the market that is driving the demand for green steel. So I have no concerns about the future order book, but it's the business environment to take advantage of that demand that this strategy needs to address.
Torsten Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and for all his hard work in recent months. And it's clear that the delays in the negotiations have had a very real price. And when I was visiting Talbot on Friday, what the workers and the management want to know is those delays have now come to an end. So can he reassure this House that we will do everything we can to make sure that the construction now does get going on the future of this plant?
Well, I thank him for his question and for recently visiting the site to speak to management and the workforce. He is right about, understandably, the level of concern that has existed in the workforce when this is obviously something that is often speculated on in the media. There's a huge amount of interest in it, and I understand that. But one of the reasons to make this statement today, Mr. Speaker, is obviously because of the need to proceed with part of the plan and not lose everything entirely, but also to be able to put and answer questions like this and make clear that the government's commitment in our manifesto to that steel transition fund is not only there, but it forms part of a wider ambition, a coherent strategy for the future of steel across every bit of the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The loss of virgin steel production in Wales is a serious economic blunder and will devastate the community of Port Talbot. Unions have previously called for additional investment of £683 million in Port Talbot to save jobs. Meanwhile, in Germany, they have invested €1.3 billion in decarbonising steel in one region alone this year. Can the Secretary of State explain why he won't match the ambition of the workers here and governments of other countries to save the Welsh steel?
Well, I'd say in response to her question, the level of ambition and the level of resource we have as a new government is actually greater than the figures that she just gave. But what you need to do the kind of work that she is describing is you need a private sector partner. The government cannot meet the capex needs of this alone, and indeed, to be successful, it is better to work with a private sector partner to deliver it. So if I had a partner to retain virgin steel production, that's part of what the strategy will be able to address. Or if I had a partner willing to keep blast furnaces open, I'm of course very interested within that. But what I don't want to do is spend this very large sum of money of our Clean Steel Fund on subsidising operating losses for maybe 1 or 2 years, which would eat up most of that £3 billion, and then be left with nothing at the end of it. I want to co-invest with the private sector for good, secure, long-term jobs, which are much in demand. But the level of resource and of ambition of this new government is in excess. She's right to say other European countries have been way ahead of the UK in the last few years, but the level of ambition from this government not only matches, it exceeds some of those European competitors.
Stephen Liddon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What discussions has he had with the workforce and their unions about this improved deal?
Well, I thank him for his question. The answer is a great many, as he will understand, but I've always been conscious, not just of the specific impact on the workforce at Port Talbot, but also in terms of what I have often said, which is I believe some of the big industrial transitions of the past in the United Kingdom, where I grew up in the northeast of England, were not handled well. I think people recognise, I thought the previous government's levelling up strategy in a sense was a recognition of the long-term damage that was done in the late 80s and early 90s in terms of that transition not being done well. So getting that right and showing the workforce that this is a government that cares has always been paramount. I've been to Port Talbot myself several times. I last met, I think, the community reps just a week ago and was able to have those frank conversations with them. That is why in everything I have said and will continue to say, I recognise I wish we were in a position to do more, but within the parameters of what we had and where we almost were in terms of the entire loss of the site. In these 2 months, I'm confident in saying this is the biggest improvement that was possible, and we will always work with them to ensure we're getting everything we can for the site.
Dr. Andrew Murray.
Mr. Speaker. The wholesale price for electricity in this country is already pretty much the highest in Europe, and it will probably get worse as we shift towards renewables, with the possibility of outages and intermittency. That means electric arc furnaces are going to become more expensive. What is he doing to ensure that suppliers perfectly legitimately turn to China for its virgin steel produced in dirty blast furnaces?
As he will know, this has long been something that has been a campaigning issue of mine. I've talked repeatedly about the relationship between decarbonisation and the potential for deindustrialisation and the policy environment in this country not being fit for purpose to deliver that. Specifically when it comes to the wholesale electricity prices energy-intensive industries have, For most of the last government, yes, the UK's prices were wildly uncompetitive. There was some movement, as he knows, with the supercharger policy near the end. I think there is more that can be done. I think there is an even more exciting longer-term position that we could get to. He'll have to wait to the budget review, the budget and maybe the spending review for some more details of that. But in terms of the competitiveness of the UK, this has got to be an essential issue and priority, and we've got to recognise a lot of the industries we will transition to are very heavy users of electricity, not just clean steel, but in terms of, for instance, gigafactories, and this will be a key tool in future that we have to do better on than we had in the last 14 years.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on securing this improved deal? I know just how hard he has worked over many years, not just in the short term before the election and since the election that he referred to in his answer to the Shadow Minister. And on the subject of procurement, can he say whether there is going to be a presumption in favour of using British-produced steel in both nationally significant projects in green energy, but also in defence, which is in stark contrast to what the previous government did, in particular with the Fleet Solid Support contract?
My honourable friend for his comments. Indeed, if I could thank him for all of his support in those years in opposition when we were tackling many of these issues. He asked specifically about procurement. Of course, anything we do as a government would be consistent with our international trade rules and our commitments to open markets and multilateralism. But when you consider the legitimate way you can consider social value in government procurement, also when you look at the value and the quality of the product we produce in the UK, I am very, very confident in procurement playing a bigger part in the future of the steel industry. And specifically in relation to defence, neither Scunthorpe or Port Talbot, in terms of the blast furnaces, play a direct role in some of the key MOD contracts, that's Sheffield's Forge Masters, that plays more of a role within there. I do therefore think there are more capacities, again, more capabilities we can look to as a country for opportunities in future.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is, and the country needs to know this, that the thousands of jobs and the loss of these blast furnaces announced today is because of both main parties' obsession with net zero. That is the truth. And the reality is blast furnaces have been losing money because of high energy costs caused by the very expensive renewable energy. But, Mr. Speaker, we are where we are, and I'd like to ask the Secretary of State to give this House a guarantee that in the event that Tata do not build the electric arc furnaces that are being promised, will he guarantee this House that the taxpayers' money will be returned to the taxpayer?
Secretary of State.
Well, I have to tell the honourable member that I'm afraid he's misinformed as to what this is about. The issue here is these sites lose approximately £1 million a day. And they've done so for a long period of time, and the owners are fed up, and they want to know there'll be a plan for the future. And therefore, the role of government is to make that a better future than it would otherwise be were we not on the pitch delivering that. There are issues around the competitive cost of industrial electricity in the UK. They are, in many ways, they're not the issues the honourable member is saying. But specifically in relation to the guarantee he is seeking, he will have heard my statement. Yes, Mr. Speaker, the contractual terms of the grant funding arrangement include that clawback capacity, not just in terms of the overall project, but specifically even down to the number of jobs per job. And that is the kind of job guarantees I want in the public-private relationship going forward.
Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's commitment to introducing a new steel strategy. Steel is not a sunset industry. It's critical for our economy and for our national security as well. I know he is a friend of Teesside, and I wonder if he can give us some clarity on the status of discussions around investment in steel in Teesside at the moment.
My honourable friend very much, and he is absolutely right to make that point, which we cannot say enough, that this is not a sunset industry. It should have a bright future. We can get this right. Specifically in relation to the negotiations with British Steel, Mr. Speaker, the honourable friend will know what I've already said in terms of the conversations with them. It is, again, a very, very challenging issue. We have made clear that government is there to play a part. We obviously want that to be part of a transition. We've made that as clear as can be, and as soon as we have further information, I will, of course, update honourable members and the House as a whole.
Victim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Secretary of State for his statement. I'm a supporter of industrial strategy, and I welcome the idea of a steel strategy in the future. I would just want to ask a couple of specific questions of detail. Firstly, is it the government's policy that the domestic manufacture of primary steel is a strategic industry that must be protected and guaranteed? What does the government intend to do about the sourcing, either domestically or through import, of coking coal? And earlier, he seemed to suggest that he wouldn't be intervening to support British Steel in Scunthorpe. And can he confirm if that is the case, and we do lose that capacity, then the country may go through 5, 6, 7 or so years without steel manufacture in this country?
Well, I thank him for his question and very much welcome his support for industrial strategy. I've said many times there should be and is in many countries a cross-party agreement, perhaps not on the detail but on the premise and what we are trying to achieve with it. He asks about the domestic manufacture, the blast furnaces remaining open. That is, of course, my preference, but I need a business partner to do that. I need a company that's willing to do that. I cannot, and I think it would be reasonable to spend the very considerable sum of money we have pledged for this on subsidising those short-term losses over the ability to deliver new things. He asks about coking coal. Well, obviously that's dependent on the long-term future of the blast furnaces. That is what they need. Specifically in relation to British Steel is what I'm saying. I want a transition plan. The specific comments earlier on my frustration that for me the ideal deal in a place like Scunthorpe would have been to build the future alongside operating what we currently have, and that was available to the last government. They didn't proceed with it. The kind of infrastructure needed for the long-term future of operating blast furnaces would require carbon capture and storage, cancelled many times by the previous government, not in there. So I'm heavily constrained by my options, but still doing everything I can to get a deal for the workforce there and to make sure there is a business there commanding the support of its customers to transition in future.
Pamela Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the Secretary of State for this announcement today of the steel strategy and commend him for managing to do so in such a short period in office. And it's something that the industry has been crying out for a very long time, and the party opposite just failed the industry without doing this. I'd like the Secretary of State to say a bit more about what his hopes are for what the strategy can achieve for the steel industry throughout the UK, and in particular in my constituency in Motherwell.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to her and thank her for her comments. I think, Mr. Speaker, when we look at the opportunities for the future, particularly in terms of renewables, of some of the steels that will be necessary in terms of the automotive sector, of some of the new technologies that are being taken up around other European countries, particularly the excitement around direct reduced iron. I do think there are future opportunities. I think how we deliver the business environment and hopefully the new partners or the existing partners to deliver that is absolutely key, and I hope that is what the strategy will deliver.
Jessica Morgan.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for this statement today, which absolutely shows the priority this government is putting on steel, which is in direct contrast to the last government, who had absolutely no industrial strategy, and it's a real treat to hear the Minister suggest otherwise earlier. Can I ask him to say a little bit more about the plans for Llanwern? We've got a really dedicated workforce there who've been through hard times recently. With support, Llanwern can turn into the finest automotive finishing line in the world. Can he commit to develop that and safeguard the future of the plant?
Thank my honourable friend for her question, and I say again, there was, and there would have been, had the election perhaps not been called, a scenario where a statement like this would not have been possible. This would have gone, this would have passed by. That was the situation that we faced. Now, she correctly talks with pride about her constituents at Llanwern, an incredibly important and successful part of our industrial supply chain in the United Kingdom, and obviously particularly important to Wales. I will make sure, as part of the transition, that of course the downstream functions, which are so valuable and so praised and carry such respect in the industry, are protected, and that the transition plan does not disrupt the business model, which again is proof of the success of the sector and the opportunities in future.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for the statement today, and I very much welcome the endeavours that the Secretary of State is making to have a firm foundation for this sector as it moves forward. I recognise that, I think we all do, Mr Speaker. And also I recognise the Minister's commitment to Harlan and Wolff, as he referred to in the statement that he made. This is indeed great news for not simply the workers but also for the construction sector in Northern Ireland. However, the problem that the steel industry faces is that of affordable energy. The Secretary of State mentioned that in his introduction. How will the Secretary of State confirm the long-term sustainability of this and other industries by addressing the energy price crisis immediately, as well as with the necessary but long-term green energy fixes? Thank you.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to the honourable member for his support for what we have been able to announce today. In terms of the competitive environment, this is an absolutely key issue. I believe, and I'm already having extensive conversations with the Chancellor and with my key Cabinet colleagues, such as the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero, about the way to do that, both in terms of the short term and the longer term, where we will clearly in future be in a position with a very significant renewable energy base, how we use some of that capacity in areas of low consumer demand. There are lots of exciting options available, and I can tell them it's a key priority for getting this right in future.
Alan Gavin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to congratulate my right honourable friend for the deal he's announced today and say, as a former British Trade Commissioner to India, this, I assure him, is a better deal from a better and more serious government than the one that we saw opposite. I wondered if you could tell the House what direct conversations he's had with Tata about future investments in the UK.
Secretary of State. Grateful to him, and indeed I want to put on the record that whilst I know the workforce at times have been frustrated with the plans of Tata, I understand why Tata themselves were frustrated with the previous government and how long that took to do. I've had extensive conversations with Tata in opposition to build the kind of relationship that I think has been necessary to deliver something like this, whether that is meeting the Executive Chair, Chandra, first at Davos, then I flew to Mumbai, colleagues might remember, to build that relationship. I actually saw him yesterday because he was in the United Kingdom alongside the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. So we're continuing to have these conversations and working with all partners to deliver the kind of opportunities we think will be available in the UK in future.
That completes the statement. I'll let the front benches change over.